No, your team lost. Your team lost. You didn't play. Your team played. I have a theory that a good coach is worth about one good player in a side.
Ooh, big call.
About roughly.
Really?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I can't. Listen, can I prove that? No, I cannot. I'm just
I want proof, Andrew Clay.
It's definitely an opinion, but we reckon it's about like.
So you're playing with 12 players, not 11.
Well, no,
with a
just
really good coach.
But one. No, you've got one extra good player out there. Yeah.
Okay. A star. It's worth a star
Put
player.
it this way: if your team is not up to it, well, no matter what code is not up to it, you can be the greatest coach. You can narrow the distance, but if you haven't got the cattle to do the job, I'm not saying like Steve Hansen, great coach, but also the best rugby players in the world, which makes you a better coach straight away.
Yes, this is. But what about someone like, say, Alex Ferguson at Manchester United, who had some increasingly rubbish cattle, but still kept winning stuff?
Well, did he? I mean, he's still, they're still the second most, or first or second most, financial team in the world. He rarely coached. I've had people say that we wouldn't know where to put the cones out. He wasn't a coach. He was an organizer delegator of things. He didn't run sessions. He oversaw it all. He was a manager, not a coach.
Just out of interest, with the English at the last Rugby World Cup, when they were down at half-time in one of those games, the game presumably in which they went out, and the coaches were still going over their moves with them on tablets and drawing graphs on, electronic
paralysis by analysis.
Well, that was what I was going to ask you. Has Jones somehow, because you say a coach is a coach, but you need the players, he must have a completely different approach, though.
Was he picked the same players? I haven't followed it closely enough to know.
No, not really. I
mean, that's probably one of the most important jobs you do in any code is picking the right players.
Yep.
And the proof of the pudding is only after it's been eaten. Was that right? I'm not sure about that quote. Yeah, England have got more resources than any other rugby nation in the world. They got, along with France, they got the most money, the most players to pick from, and they should be doing really well.
We were in a Mexican restaurant, says Richard, a texter, in Newtown on Sunday afternoon when Chile beat Mexico 7-0. The restaurant owner was Mexican, the chef was Chilean.
Oh.
Did the food get better or worse as the afternoon wore on?
Well, it got better if you maybe I would have closed it down. I've been in Mexico and watched football in Mexico in front of 80,000 people. It's amazing. It's great fun.
Time magazine said Peter Snell was like a Sherman tank on overdrive. George Andrews.
That's a great one. Yes, just a tremendous physical specimen, and how much faster he would have gone had he, had more opportunity to.
I'm just going through some of the other texts, but they're a bit too long, some of them. I always look for short ones, but there are some major expositions.
Good advice for you texters out there. Learn your lessons.
Yep, Jim has got a short attention span.
A considerable number we've got just time for this before we go, of Indian students seem to have gained study visas here using false financial documents. Immigration New Zealand sending out deportation liability notices to a number of them who may not have the financial means they claimed they did to support themselves study here. And the students themselves may not know that any fraud's been committed by agents back in India. Part of the problem the agents there have is they deal with families who don't use banks. So paper trails and such are hard. Here is the question. Do you send them home? Because they won't finish their courses, they won't presumably get refunds, certainly not all of them. The agents keep the commissions. Do you send them home or not?
It's a really hard one.
It is
because they are not absolutely the perpetrators of the crime, really. They are part victim, part perpetrator. And
but if you don't, the other side is if you don't send them home, then are you just in, if you've now got an agent going, don't worry, you'll get in there, they won't send you home.
That's right. Or I guess the middle way for that is your grandfather, the ones who are already here, and then come down hard on the law from tomorrow.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, there's going to be some genuine victims in there. There might be some ones who are complicit in it, but there's going to be some genuine victims in there, and I'd feel very bad for them. So perhaps that is the solution.
I suspect the political decision will be the fact, the international foreign student market is making us lots of money. Let's not do anything that's going to scare anybody off.
Yeah, so as long as they can be supported when they're here, that's the problem. It doesn't make money if they suddenly become a drain on social services or for whatever reason. So,
and if you come down hard on them tomorrow, they'll go to Australia or they'll go to Canada.
Yep. And it is one of the few. Well, it is a growth area in the economy.
So let them break our laws because it might, cost us money if we don't.
Exactly. That's
what you're saying, Jim.
That's the lesson for today.
Is that what you're saying, Jim? Thank you, Andrew Clay. Always a delight.
A pleasure, Jim.
Tim Watkin, always a great pleasure.
Cheers, guys.
And that, everybody, is the panel. Thank you very much for listening. And Checkpoint with John Campbell on the way.
Kia ora everyone, welcome to Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm John Campbell on behalf of the Checkpoint team. Thank you for joining us. Tonight, the government that strongly rejected the idea is now giving its first clear sign that Aucklanders will face road user charges to pay for the city's transport system. The Department of Corrections plays down reports of a riot involving up to 37 inmates at Mount Eden Prison this afternoon. Not a riot, they say a disorder event. A near disorder event of some magnitude in the US as a teenager tells police he really did want to kill Donald Trump. Is bulk funding being revived? A proposal for schools which would see principals left to decide how much to set aside for staffing. The Christchurch City Council defends its decision to rely on people's honesty when deciding how much their homes are worth. And a mysterious seller and a very expensive singlet. We call Peter Snell to get his reaction and end up breaking the news to him. All of that and much more. But first, Katrina Batten with RNZ News.
Kia ora, good evening. The government's given its first clear sign that Aucklanders will eventually have to pay road tolls to help fund the city's transport system. It's previously been cool on the idea, but now backs it in a report it's written jointly with the Auckland Council, which is already committed to charging. The government and council are trying to agree on how to fund a 30-year transport program. The Transport Minister, Simon Bridges, says in the longer term road pricing will be part of the toolkit. The Auckland Mayor, Len Brown, says any agreement on road pricing would need to be agreed upon sooner rather than later.
We would need to have that finalised, I would suspect, by 2018-19, and therefore the community engaged and a debate concluded by that time.
Auckland Mayor Len Brown. The government and council are trying to agree on a 30-year program of major transport projects and new ways to fund it. The president of the Principals Federation, Ian Taylor, says the government needs to explain its proposal for a radical overhaul of the way teacher salaries are funded. The government has suggested letting schools decide how much of their annual funding is allocated to staffing. Ian Taylor says that sounds like bulk funding, a controversial system for funding teacher salaries that was axed 16 years ago, and the school sector needs more information.
It's incredibly significant. It does sound like bulk funding, and I don't want to get into the arguments pro or against bulk funding, but it is a significant change if this was to happen, and there's not enough information that's out there about explaining it.
Ian Taylor says the government should have explained its proposal at a meeting with education representatives last week. The Christchurch City Council has been called naive for relying on people's honesty when deciding how much their homes are worth. The council is getting valuations done on 160,000 properties so it can set next year's rates, and is asking people to say whether earthquake repairs have been done or not so it can accurately assess a home's value. A real estate agent, Lynette McFadden, says it's concerning that the council is relying on people's honesty.
I think it's naive of our council to think that everybody is going to be meticulously honest, and I think that's what's required when you're dealing with somebody's biggest asset, and I think they've got to rely on more than somebody else's honesty.
Lynette McFadden says those looking to buy a house should not rely on its rateable value and should get their own valuation done. America's Defence Secretary says New Zealand's decision to extend its important role in the fight against Islamic State in Iraq is commendable. Ash Carter says he told Defence Minister Jerry Brownlee in Germany last month that the lasting defeat of Islamic State must be a global undertaking. Mr Carter last year wrote to the government in Wellington to urge it to boost its military contribution in the fight against Islamic State in Iraq and Syria. At the time, Mr Carter told the US Senate Armed Services Committee he had personally contacted 40 nations to encourage them to do more. New Zealand will keep troops in Iraq for an extra 18 months. Sir Peter Snell says he's considering donating his gold medals to Te Papa to join his 1964 Olympic singlet. The black singlet worn by Sir Peter when he won the 800 metres and 1500 metres at the same Games was sold at an auction this morning for $122,500. Sir Peter, who's now 77 and lives in Texas, says he's blown away by the fact that anyone would pay that much for it, given it sold for just a few $100s at a charity auction years ago. He says he's glad it went to Te Papa, and he's thinking about sending them his 2 gold medals from 1964 to add to the collection.
Now that Te Papa has the singlet, then my thinking is, and I'll talk to my daughters about this, they need to have the medals to go along with it. They would be free, of course. They don't have to pay anything for that.
Sir Peter Snell says he still receives letters from young athletes from around the world inspired by his career. In sport, the Wallabies coach Michael Cheika has hit back at Steve Hanson's comments that Cheika allowed England coach Eddie Jones to bully him in the media with little response. Cheika says the remarks were shallow and a potshot. Jones has been the more vocal of the two coaches during the series, which England has won. Meanwhile, All Black first five Aaron Cruden took part in training today, despite being stretchered off the field in Saturday's win over Wales. All Blacks assistant coach Ian Foster says he's making a quick recovery.
He's a bit stiff in his neck area, but he's moving, training. He'll do some kicking this afternoon with us, and so he's on light duties, but we expect him to progress pretty strongly, pretty quickly.
Team New Zealand has launched its first custom-designed development boat ahead of next year's America's Cup in Bermuda. The 45-foot catamaran is the final step before the team builds the 50-foot race boat it will use in the America's Cup. And Wales has beaten Russia 3-0 this morning to top Group B and move into the round of 16 at football's Euro 2016 in France. Wales finished with 6 points, one ahead of England, who also advanced after a goalless draw with Slovakia. Slovakia should also reach the last 16 as one of the best third-place teams. That's the news.
A waste of time. Propping up the Iraqi army isn't contributing a great deal. It's poorly led and not really equipped to take on a major conflict such as is happening. Doing our bit.
New Zealand is not immune to the sort of lone wolf attack that you saw in Orlando. That guy was not in direct contact with ISIL, but he took his mandate from that particular evil doctrine.
Uncertain times.
There could be significant costs. The biggest cost to business is uncertainty, and there's going to be a considerable amount of uncertainty for a period of time.
A global picture. Susie Ferguson and Guy Aspinall, Morning Reports, weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to noon, what do schools need to do to protect themselves from fraud? And after 10, Christchurch businessman, entrepreneur and rich lister John Ryder on his top tips for global investing. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met Service weather to midnight. Tomorrow, Northland to Taranaki, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty, Taumaranui and Taupo. Mostly cloudy, patchy drizzle turning to widespread rain overnight, with some heavy falls tomorrow easing from Waikato southwards later. Gisborne to Wairarapa, also Taihape, Whanganui and Manawatu, high cloud. Scattered rain developing tomorrow morning, clearing south of Napier tomorrow evening. Horowhenua to Wellington, cloudy, rain developing overnight. Bulla, Nelson and northern Marlborough, occasional rain becoming persistent and heavier tonight, easing for a time tomorrow morning and afternoon. For the remainder of Marlborough and Canterbury, high cloud with scattered rain overnight. Westland and Fiordland, rain, heavy at times and possibly thundery from tonight. Otago and Southland, cloudy with scattered rain this afternoon and evening. And the Chatham Islands, cloudy, a few showers until evening, rain developing tomorrow. It's 5:08.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina. Lots of breaking news this afternoon. Let's begin with some of it. The chances of Aucklanders paying road tolls has become, it seems, more likely, with the government for the first time saying the move will come. The government's previously been cool on the push by the Auckland Council to introduce road tolls from 2018 to help pay for essential transport projects over the coming decades. But today the Minister of Transport, Simon Bridges, said, and I quote, directly charging for road use will be part of the toolkit. That toolkit is a joint ongoing project with the Council to identify what its major transport needs are over the next 30 years and how to pay for them. Simon Bridges joins us live on the phone now. Welcome to the program, Minister. Nice to talk to you.
Afternoon, John. Good to talk to you.
What's going to happen?
Yeah, basically, I think what this report is telling us, it's the second of third. The first was on the sort of the context facts, if you like. This is really setting out the emerging approach for Auckland transportation. And what it's saying, I think, is a couple of things. Firstly, we need a combination of supply side and demand measures to make a real difference. But we've got to change the way we're thinking about this. It's not just going to be supply. So yes, we will need to do something on that side. We will need more roads. We will need more public transport.
Will there be road tolls? Will there be road tolls in Auckland?
And then I think the other part, and that's in the shorter term, so that is, more investment and giving us a really good sense of the areas where we need to do that. I think in relation to pricing, what I'm saying to you is actually longer term, as we look out, demand side interventions will be of real importance as well.
Right, hold on a sec. Demand side interventions, explicitly, does that mean road tolls?
Yes, but it also tolls is perhaps not the word I would use. Pricing.
Okay, hold on one sec.
So
have you spoken this? Yeah, well, what's really important is that in 2012 and 2013, your government, your colleagues, Jerry Brownlee in particular, who went into a singular denial that this would ever happen, but also Stephen Joyce and John Key absolutely ruled this out.
Well, we're talking about a progressive approach where we need to, I think, get a final report first. It's too early to be definitive. I think we need more work, but where we progressively move towards pricing. And what the report is talking about, variable network pricing, which I think is different from tolling over a decade or thereabouts.
How is it different? How is variable network pricing different from tolling? How do you pay variable network pricing? It's a toll, isn't it?
Well, ultimately, variable network pricing, and we're not talking tomorrow, we're not talking next month, we're not talking next year, is directly charging for road use and varying charges by location and time of
also
day.
Known as a toll.
Well, I'm calling it pricing. I think when tolls, you're talking about gantries and the like, and I'm just trying to simply say to you, John, that's not necessarily what we're talking about here at all. I think the other important point in relation to your point about Jerry Brownlee, Stephen Joyce and others is what this isn't about. The ATAP report and the process has been specifically mandated not to be about revenue. This is very much about behaviour change and getting better results in terms of congestion on our transport network. So this is not about raising money in 2018, so as I think you said in your introduction, to fill some kind of funding gap. It's about I think two things.
If it's not
having
about
the projects
revenue,
in the shorter term that we accelerate, and then getting to pricing.
Look, there are going to be lots of people who agree with you doing this. I think Len Brown, who was ridiculed by Jerry Brownlee when he suggested this, is going to be delighted. But if it's not about revenue, and there's going to be lots of people who say user pay is a good idea, but if it's not about revenue, what's happening to the money? I mean, these are weasel words, aren't they?
No,
you are collecting money
so at all. I think
from
when we think
Auckland road users, which will go into the consolidated fund. That's tolls.
No, and I don't think it's weasel words at all, because I think actually when you think about pricing and what you're first and foremost, and as I say, I think what we are trying to do here is we are trying to change behaviours so that we're getting better results from the system. I mean, put bluntly, what this is really about is there will come a point in our network in the not-too-distant future, and we're not there right yet, where we just can't keep adding lanes to the motorways. And I think, again, you'd say, well, most people would agree with that. So then you have to move from the supply when you've done the Northwestern Busway, when you've looked further south at the local roads and the public transport, and you've accelerated the projects that will make sense regardless of what you do on the demand side. Then you have to say, actually, we need some behavioural shift, yes, onto public transport. Yes, actually, I think increasingly, and people would say this was sci-fi a little while ago, but connected cars, ride sharing, which is changing behaviour. But yes, also, over on the horizon is that issue of pricing. And I think, look, we're just seeing here, yes, Mayor Brown and I and Bill English and Bill Cashmore, one of the councillors, that the evidence and the expert analysis in a preliminary way, but I think pretty clearly, is saying to us, if all you do is supply, keep on building, you're not going to deal with the transport problems that Auckland
Exactly, and they were the arguments put by people who were proponents of this some years ago, soundly rejected by your colleagues. When do you think that people will be paying charges for the use of Auckland roads that they're not currently paying. When do you expect this might start happening?
Well, I think if we think about this in a timeline sense, the first step that's going to come out of this is, I just think, later this year, a prioritised investment program of where it makes sense, because there's certain areas that are under real pressure in Auckland to accelerate the funding and to get the projects that we need to complete our network. So that is first, and I think that's the sort of the short-term pressure, if you like. I think the issue of, the technologies, the intelligent transport systems and the pricing comes later. But I do think, and I do hope, that the implementation plan we get out of the final ATAP report gives us a sense of that pathway where we can progressively move towards this. And I think the answer is over a decade.
What, introduced over a decade or not for a decade?
I think by and large, in terms of getting to that variable network pricing, we're talking about a decade. But it moves to that to enable it. I think we can see earlier, and I think, look, on that front, I don't know what I don't know. I know from the officials and the experts from AECOM and various transport consultancies that they will need to go away and do much more sophisticated modelling on just the hows and the whys and the what fors. But we can say today, which I agree with you, we haven't said before, both Auckland and central government, is that what the modelling's showing us is we can't just keep building at a certain point. We're also going to lessen congestion, have more capacity on the network to do these other demand side issues as well.
Simon Bridges, Transport Minister, thank you very much indeed for joining us this evening. It's 5:16 on Checkpoint. Let's go briefly to the US, where a British man has been denied bail after allegedly trying to wrestle a gun from a police officer in an attempt, it's said, to shoot presumptive Republican presidential nominee Donald Trump. 19-year-old Michael Sanford told a Secret Service agent he'd driven to Las Vegas from California with the intention of killing Mr. Trump at a rally being held at the Treasure Island Resort. Mr. Trump was mid-speech as the incident unfolded.
When we get 37 states, we love our police. We love our police. Thank you, officers. By the way, how great are our police, okay? They don't get enough credit. They don't get enough credit. They don't. They take abuse. They don't get the credit they deserve, believe me.
Donald Trump, the man who'd been living in the US for the past 18 months, visited a gun range last Friday where he learnt to use a Glock pistol for the first time. He told police he'd been attempting to kill Mr. Trump for a year, but had only just built up the confidence to do so. This is reportedly what he told the police. Sanford had also purchased tickets to Mr. Trump's rally in Arizona, where he planned to try again if the opportunity arose. Meanwhile, Mr. Trump himself has told his controversial campaign manager, "You're fired." Corey Lewandowski had been with the campaign since the beginning of the White House bid, the man credited with letting Trump be Trump. Mr. Lewandowski made headlines in March after he was charged with assault for manhandling a female reporter in Florida during a campaign event. Lots of discussion of that at the time. Trump, of course, rejected that it had happened. It's believed to be an attempt to correct a series of missteps by Mr. Trump over the last 2 weeks, which have seen him drop quite sharply in the polls. Mr. Lewandowski was a good sport about the dismissal today when he addressed media in New York.
Look, I don't know if it's so much of a surprise. Again, I want to say how honored I am to be part of this team, and it's been such a privilege to be part of the team. I think, what has been clear from the get-go that my strategy has been, and at some level was successful, is let Trump be Trump. And you've got a person who has completely changed the way that politics is viewed in this country for the better. And I have said and will continue to say I will support Donald Trump in any endeavor he has. If I can play a role in this campaign, whether it's formal or informal, that would be an honor for me to have.
Corey Lewandowski speaking to the media in New York earlier. A government proposal is threatening to revive one of the most bitter disputes the education sector has seen in the past quarter of a century or so. A Ministry of Education document suggests letting schools decide how much of their funding to set aside for staffing each year. Principals and teachers groups say that sounds like bulk funding to them, and they're angry the government has sprung it on them. John Gerritsen, our education correspondent, has been looking at this.
The proposal would let schools decide how much of their funding to use for what it calls staffing credits and how much for operational funding. Government documents say it's not bulk funding because the Education Ministry will continue to pay teachers' salaries. However, any unused staffing credits are paid to schools at the end of the year, and the president of the PPTA, Angela Roberts, says it's clearly bulk funding.
It is bulk funding. It is some minor technicalities that make it something different. And I think it's very cynical of the ministry to think that they can con people with a change in language.
Angela Roberts says the union's fear is that the system will incentivise schools to cut corners on staffing so they can use the money saved elsewhere.
The schools get to decide how they spend that, how many teachers they purchase effectively and how many teacher aides. So schools will be incentivised through the averaging out to have cheaper teachers or fewer teachers because they can cash that money up.
The president of the Principals Federation, Ian Taylor, says the proposal is concerning and certainly sounds like bulk funding. He says the government's advisory group on the review of the school and early childhood funding systems met last week, and it should have been fully briefed on the suggestion.
It is a significant change if this was to happen, and there's not enough information that's out there about explaining it.
Yeah, you should have been briefed about this in some detail on Friday, you think?
Yeah, I think we definitely should have, because there's quite a lot of depth in that, and the ministry will probably say, well, it's all on the ministry website, you could have seen it there. Well, yes, we could have, but they should have talked about this specifically.
The National Secretary of the NZEI, Paul Galter, says the proposal has come out of the blue, and it looks like bulk funding in everything but name. He says that's a mistake because it's already been proved that bulk funding doesn't work.
The unfortunate experience of the 1990s, where there were a lot of empires being built up around bulk funding, with money being saved off teacher salaries, beginning teachers being hired in place of experienced teachers because they cost too much, and so on. And that's just no way to build up a broad-based, highly skilled and competent teaching workforce across New Zealand.
Paul Galter says bulk funding would undermine the staffing ratios that ensure the youngest children get the most care. And he says nothing about the government's proposal makes it more palatable than the bulk funding of the 1990s. The Education Minister, Hekia Parata, says bulk funding is not on the agenda, and all of the government's proposals for changing the school funding system are up for discussion. For Checkpoint, John Gerritsen.
Mount Eden Prison went into lockdown this afternoon after a group of prisoners refused to be locked up. Corrections say the disorder was resolved after an hour. Department of Corrections Regional Commissioner Jeanette Burns joins us on the phone now. Welcome to Checkpoint. Jeanette, nice to talk to you. What happened today at Mount Eden?
Oh, good evening. We had a unit with about 37 prisoners in it, and 14 of those decided to have a bit of a protest because some of them didn't want to transfer. So they went up to one of the top landings in this particular unit, barricaded themselves a little bit there, not too seriously. Staff dealt with the incident beautifully and had it resolved peacefully within an hour.
Okay, what is the unit? Who are these people?
Oh, these are remand prisoners who are in Mount Eden.
And what were they objecting to? Why did they barricade themselves in?
They didn't want to transfer out of the prison because, as you're probably aware, our muster is at an all-time high.
Yeah, absolutely.
A lot of prisoner movements around the country and a lot of prisoner movements through this prison. So they were just objecting to the amount of movements that have been happening.
Is that putting stress on prisoners and the prison and its staff?
Mostly it's fine. This is a remand jail, so it's used to having a lot of movements. The way in which the prisoners protested their wishes to us was not ideal and certainly not acceptable. They need to be talking to us if they've got issues and we can deal with them.
I guess, though, the talking to you is going to make no difference, right? These people are feeling fairly powerless. I mean, if they say, look, we don't want to be transferred, they're still going to be transferred. Was there damage done? Was anyone attacked? Was anything smashed? Or was it a fairly passive kind of...
It was passive. It was passive because the staff managed it very well. We had a good forward command down there. He was talking to the prisoners all of the time, and we were able to resolve it with no damage to the unit. No staff got hurt. No prisoners got hurt. It was very, very well managed.
So when you say that the person in charge was talking to the prisoners, did he or she persuade them to come out effectively? Was this all done verbally, or did eventually someone have to go through the door and lift these people up and haul them out?
No. It was all done peacefully through negotiation, which is what we're trained to do. And when it works like that, it's a great result.
Will any charges be laid?
Yes, they will be because, at the end of the day, they did disobey lawful orders, some of these prisoners, so there is a repercussion for that. So we'll just work our way through that, and just as we would normally when a prisoner doesn't do the right thing.
Can I just seek some clarification here? If charges are being laid, that implies a degree of seriousness that your previous description didn't quite lead to. So how serious was this?
So these are internal charges, not external.
Right,
these
thank
are
you.
Police charges. These are internal charges for prisoners who aren't following the rules or who are disobeying the rules. Quite different.
Okay, how many of the prisoners involved will be charged? All of them?
Can't tell you that yet. We're still working through it, and seeing who was absolutely involved in this.
I know this is a very hard question for you to answer it, and I'm fully expecting you to play a straight bat. But is your prison too full? Are you struggling to cope with what you call a roster, but is in fact you're crowded to capacity there, aren't you?
Every prison's full at the moment, and the staff are doing a really good job to manage those musters.
Jeanette Burns, who is the Department of Corrections Regional Commissioner, thank you very much indeed for joining us. The time on Checkpoint is 5:25. Coming up on Checkpoint, Peter Snell's reaction when he hears what a singlet sold for. We'd love your feedback on the issues of the day or anything you want to discuss with us. You can text us 2101, which lots of you do. Text 2101 or email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. And don't forget our Facebook and Twitter pages. In 1964, Peter Snell won gold medals at the Tokyo Olympics in the 800 and 1500 metres. That was 52 years ago. No one has managed that extraordinary double at an Olympic Games since. In an age where many top athletes and sports people get new singlets, jerseys or uniforms every time they appear, it's easy to forget that Peter Snell competed in the 800 and the 1500 metres in the same black singlet, number 466. Today, with a rather mysterious provenance, only the seller seems to know how he or she got it, and they're not saying, it came up for auction in Auckland.
An iconic piece of New Zealand history. It's Peter Snell's 1964 Tokyo singlet. It's got his number there, 466 of course. It's certainly catched a bit of attention. This is the original one. You've got PG Snell labelled to the back there. We like that. I think we've got a few phone bids lined up. 112,500. Phone bidder. 115. 115. 17,500. $117,500. 117,500. That's the bid. 120. 120. 122,500. 122,500. 122,500. Sounds like a no. 122,500 for the first time. The second time, the third and final time at 122,500. Thank you. Yes, well done.
So $122,000, which is a lot of money, none of which, as far as we're aware, is going to the athlete who made that black singlet so sought after and so valuable. Over the past few weeks, as news of the auction broke, Sir Peter himself has chuckled at estimates that it might sell for as much as $40,000 and wondered how on earth he parted with it in the first place. He has no memory of giving it away or of anything that happened to it really after the games themselves. So when it sold for that extraordinary figure, we called to ask him what he thought of $122,000, but he didn't know. All he'd heard was the pre-auction estimates, and he'd also heard earlier in the day from a prospective bidder.
Interestingly, I had an email from Russell Coots today, and I was amazed. Russell said, I'm going to try and buy your singlet. I thought, Russell must have a hell of a lot more money than I do.
Well, Sir Peter, someone's just paid $122,000 for it, so maybe it was Russell Coots.
Oh, I can't believe that. So the person that lucked out in sort of finding this is the one that benefits handsomely from all this.
Yeah.
Of course, the guy whose singlet it was just gave it away for hopefully for a charity thing, and now this is what happened. So obviously, I didn't realize how valuable that might become.
Yeah, that speaks volumes about you, though, and your humility, and why. I mean, there is some stuff money can't buy, right? And that's respect and decency, and that's your reputation, isn't it?
Hopefully. Anyway, golly, this is sort of it's sort of flattering in a way that someone would think that was worth that sort of money. And I guess the guy that found it is just rubbing his hands with glee.
Yeah.
But how that singlet ended up where it was, I have no idea. Initially, I thought, I must have left it at home when I came over here to go to school, and then my wife, who was disposing of stuff, but she is adamant that it wasn't her. She said she sent my that Abercrombie blazer off to Goodwill, and that was about it. And so what I think, there was always a lot of pressure to donate stuff for good causes, and that's probably what happened in this case.
It's funny, isn't it? When you look at athletes now, everything is figure hugging, designed to be aerodynamic and to not be wind resistant in any way. And I mean, your singlet, bless it, your beautiful singlet that you won 2 medals at the same Olympic Games, 2 golds at the same Olympic Games in, is it looks like the sort of thing you do your shearing in on the farm. It's all floppy and sort of heavy.
That's typical New Zealand. I look upon those black singlets with the silver fin as pretty iconic.
Yeah, hell yes. Did it really have your name stitched in the back like your mum had done it? Yeah. Snell PG. Did it really have that?
Yes, it did. Yeah. I have a feeling that those labels may have come from the as part of the outfitting process. They knew what our sizes were, and we actually were given the labels. I don't think Mum came up with it. Anyway, so that I suppose gives it a measure of authenticity.
Yeah, and also I think what it means to people, and also, what you mean to people as part of our history and our sporting history and our general history. This is a measure of the esteem in which you were held. I mean, it would be lovely if the esteem in which you were held meant that you were getting $122,000 rather than some other bugger.
Well, I'm enjoying life. I don't need it, I guess. I'm still able to play some competitive sports. In fact, I just got back from some senior games in the wine country in Sonoma, and managed to knock off the 75 plus table tennis players, men, and then. Mind you, when you get to 75 plus, there's not a lot of people in your age group. But table tennis is a good sport, and the Chinese around here in Dallas are pretty darn good. It's hard to prevail.
I'm delighted to have the opportunity to tell you something. I interviewed John Carlos, who at 68. Do you remember he did the black?
I sure do. In fact, I met John Carlos not too many years ago, and he told us a wonderful story about his delinquent childhood, where he was fast enough to be able to, when he was running away after having stolen something, he would be able to make the bridge that over the canal. And sort of get away. But he was quite a character. So he and Tommy Smith did the power salute, right?
The black power salute on the podium, which was
that's right, 68.
That's right. Well, at the end of the interview, when I finished the interview with him, he said, "I need you to tell the people of New Zealand what a great man Peter Snell is." And he did. And so at the end of the interview, I said that on air. But he said, "You have to tell Peter Snell from me that he's one of the finest people I ever met in athletics." And so I'm honoured to be able to tell you that. And that's part of your reputation, I guess, which means your jersey's worth $122,000. It's lovely to be seen like that, isn't it?
Well, yeah, it is. It is. I feel very, very good about it, and that my life has been greatly enriched as a result of putting the effort in that I did as a young person. And the mantra is use it or lose it.
Yeah. Well, you've used it beautifully, Sir Peter.
Well, I'm trying to, yes.
Yeah, you have. Yeah. Which is why a funny old black singlet is worth $122,000. Right.
Well, my wife's not going to believe this, but I'll pass this on to her, and well, we may see you all in New Zealand next year at the Senior Games playing table tennis.
Well, we'd like that.
Auckland is hosting it, I believe.
We'd like that very much.
Okay.
Thank you so much. It's lovely to talk to you. And on behalf of everyone listening, thanks for everything.
Yeah. Interesting news, shall I say.
When we spoke to Sir Peter, we didn't yet know, no one yet knew that Te Papa had purchased it. Our colleague Mohammed called him back and he was delighted about that and is now thinking of giving his medals, not selling for $122,000, but giving his medals to Te Papa too. The time is 5:35. Katrina Batten coming up. Victoria University research shows tax evasion costs the New Zealand economy 30 times more than benefit fraud, but isn't punished as much by the courts. Christchurch City Council calls on the honesty of its homeowners. Samoa Observer newspaper publishes a front page apology. Nona is back, but before all of that, here is the 5:35.5 headlines.
The government's given its first clear sign that Aucklanders will eventually have. I'll just wait until my mic turns on. It's not quite there yet. Oh, there we go. Okay, and there we go, and the mic's on. The government's given its first clear sign that Aucklanders will eventually have to pay road charges to help fund the city's transport system. It's previously been cool on the idea, but now backs it in a report it's written jointly with the Auckland Council, which is already committed to charging. The government and council are trying to agree on how to fund a 30-year transport program. The Transport Minister, Simon Bridges, told Checkpoint what he calls variable network pricing could happen in a decade. The NZEI's National Secretary says a government proposal for changing the school funding system is a new version of the divisive bulk funding system of the 1990s. The proposal suggests that schools be allowed to decide how much of their annual funding to allocate to staffing. Paul Golter says it looks like bulk funding and it's a bad idea. The Department of Corrections is playing down reports of a riot at Mount Eden Prison this afternoon. A prison source told RNZ News that up to 37 inmates barricaded themselves at the prison and a special response team from other prisons had been sent to break up the disturbance. Corrections says 20 inmates in one unit refused to be locked up, but it was not a riot and was peacefully resolved within an hour. America's Defence Secretary says New Zealand's decision to extend its important role in the fight against Islamic State in Iraq is commendable. Ash Carter says he told the Defence Minister Jerry Brownlee in Germany last month that the lasting defeat of Islamic State must be a global undertaking. New Zealand will keep troops in Iraq for an extra 18 months. Sir Peter Snell says he's considering donating his gold medals to Te Papa to join his 1964 Olympic singlet. Te Papa today bought the singlet worn by Sir Peter when he won the 800 metres and 1500 metres at the same games. It cost $122,500. I'll be back at 6 with more news, sport and headlines. And weather.
And weather. Thanks very much indeed, Katrina. Nona. No, I was going to give the time, but I just couldn't read it. Nona Peltier is back. Wonderful to have you back, Nona, to do business. Tegel Chicken, we've talked a bit about them.
Yeah, they listed last month,
yeah,
and
right.
Today they announced their maiden financial result for the full year ended April 24th.
They listed at a reasonable premium, didn't they?
Yeah, they did. And they've now come up with their financial result for the full year ended.
So how'd they go?
Well, actually, 13% better than they were forecasting.
Right, so people who bought in the float are going to be reasonably pleased about this?
Well, yeah, but I mean, on the other hand, they're not forecasting an increase for the current financial year, for the 2017 year. And so a few things added to that. They were export market, they're developing their export market, but domestic sales were quite strong. That's because one of their competitors had a problem with supply, so that saw them shift some of their product back into the New Zealand market, which meant their export market didn't grow as much as the market had been expecting. So that meant that the share price ended down just like a cent. So it was kind of a flat sort of reaction. However, I spoke with the chief executive of Tegel, and he's got high hopes for their development of their export market. They've invested, and we've heard a bit about this recently, in sort of advanced technology production equipment to help improve the speed of processing and reduce the costs. So that's increased their profit margins. So overall, it's a pretty good result. And going forward, I think that the company, is quite optimistic that they're going to develop the markets that they hope. So yeah, pretty good result. And the other thing that they've done, believe it or not, after 12 years, they've upgraded their brand image. So they've got new products and a new brand. Sort of like instead of having a whole bunch of different kinds of products that have grown over the term of 12 years, so a little bit of chicken nuggets here, and it all starts to look a bit mishmashed. They've got a new product range, so they think that their new brand, 12 years that it's been since they refreshed it, is going to make a bit of a difference, and they've got high hopes for that too. So that's the Tegel result.
Excellent. Tegel news. What about the rest of the markets?
Well, that's a little bit more interesting, I guess, because of the Brexit thing.
This is fascinating. We've got some more on Brexit coming up.
So for our listeners, Brexit is really this referendum that's coming up at the end of this week in our time. So that's going to be early Friday morning. We'll start getting some of the early results. And that's a referendum for the British to decide whether or not they want to stay in the EU or exit the EU. That's the name Brexit or Brexin. So Brexit is now, and the Brexit, it has been to and froing. We've seen for a long time there was a real, a bit of a sleeper because no one really expected the British to vote to exit the EU. But last week, suddenly the polls showed that there was a real momentum behind an exit. And that threw the markets into all sorts of turmoil. We saw the pence against the New Zealand dollar rise to 50p, which is quite a lot.
Yeah, it is.
It's back down to about 58.5 at the moment. That's because the polls have shifted.
48.5?
Yeah, 48.5.
Yep.
And so what's interesting there is that what's really driving that is not as so much the polls, but what the bookmakers' odds say. Yeah, that's all shifted around. So the betting money is the careful money, and the careful money is betting that that Britain will stay in the EU at the moment. So we've seen some movement there. We've had a lot of commentary, basically from everybody in the world. Meanwhile, the New Zealand dollar is sitting in its little quiet place. The only movement is really against the pound. So we're at trading at 71.1 US cents, 95.1 Australian, and it's a really narrow range there, 48.5 pence, as I said before. And the RNZ top 50 index ended down just a 0.4%, down 30 points to 6,839.
Wonderful to have you back. Thanks, Nona. Nona was talking about Brexit. Let's look at it. Obviously, the campaign is entering its final days. As Nona says, referendum Thursday, England time. It comes as MPs pay tribute in Parliament to their colleague Jo Cox, who was killed last Thursday. Briefly suspending campaigning. The main issue that continues to dominate Brexit is immigration. The ABC's Europe correspondent Lisa Miller reports.
The sausages are cooking and the children are riding ponies. It's all very English. But the man in the Union Jack top hat, flipping the burgers, is Polish.
Well, I don't have a personal view on politics. I know everything about food and beverages, but I am sure that the decision that we're going to take as a whole community and whole nation is going to affect at least one generation. And I hope the decision that we're going to take is going to be for good for everyone.
Mario Marzek moved to England a decade ago with his wife and daughter. The tone of this EU referendum has left him dismayed.
I'm here cooking barbecue on community events, being involved as a vice chair of Friends Group, which my wife and myself we started. And for me it's very emotional. So,
Mario, you're tearing up.
Yeah, because I think it's unfair.
Immigration has been at the centre of the debate over whether Britain should quit its membership of the 28-nation union. A controversial poster which shows thousands of asylum seekers streaming through Europe with the tagline, breaking point sparked a defection from the Leave campaign. The former chair of the Conservative Party, Saida Vazi, says she'll now be voting in.
I had a vision of Britain which was engaged with the world, outward looking. This was a unique opportunity to recollaborate our relationship with the European Union. But unfortunately, what I found as the campaign progressed was that those of us whom I define as hello worlders, their message was sidelined, and instead we started to hear a message which was inward looking, which was xenophobic, which was divisive. And there came a moment on Sunday morning where I felt that I could no longer stand by that message.
There has been much soul-searching since the murder of MP Jo Cox. From her friend and colleague Rachel Reeves.
To combat and guard against hatred, intolerance and injustice. To serve others with dignity and with love. And that is the best way that we can remember Jo and all that she stood for. But last, let me say this. Batley and Spen will go on to elect a new MP. But no one can replace a mother.
There were tributes at a rare recall of Parliament, with a pointed line from Labour MP Stephen Kinnock.
Mr Speaker, I can only imagine Jo's reaction had she seen the poster unveiled hours before her death. A poster on the streets of Britain that demonised hundreds of desperate refugees, including hungry, terrified children, fleeing from the terror of ISIS and from Russian bombs. She would have responded with outrage and with a robust rejection of the calculated narrative of cynicism, division and despair that it represents. Because Jo understood that rhetoric has consequences.
2 days until Britons go to the polls, the result still very much uncertain.
That's the ABC's Europe correspondent, Lisa Miller. Obviously, we will be covering the poll at length on Friday. Tax evasion costs the New Zealand economy 30 times more than benefit fraud. 30 times more. But research by Victoria University shows the courts prosecute 10 times more welfare fraudsters than tax evaders. And if that sounds like it's back to front, the researcher behind these figures believes courts do treat tax evasion significantly less harshly than benefit fraud, despite the former costing much more. Sharon Brett-Kelly's been looking at this.
After years of scouring court records and serious fraud office cases, Associate Professor Lisa Marriott has found that white-collar crime actually does pay. She says the differences in the way white-collar and blue-collar criminals are treated in the courts are stark.
Tax evaders that have been criminally prosecuted have an 18% chance of receiving a prison sentence. And if you contrast that with welfare fraud, the welfare fraudsters had on average, a 67% chance of receiving a prison sentence.
It's not just the sentences that differ, but the language used in the courts.
You do tend to see much more punitive language. They will use phrases about ripping off the system, and in many of the cases of white-collar crime, there's a discussion around concessions being given for good character and willingness to accept that there may be reasons.
But Lisa Marriott says the damage done by tax evasion is worth hundreds of millions of dollars more than welfare fraud.
Detected tax evasion is around about $1 billion. Well, the estimates of undetected tax evasion are that it's more in the realms of $5 to $7 billion a year. So this is quite a significant problem in society.
Alistair Russell is the advocacy coordinator at Auckland Action Against Poverty. He says it is no surprise that 10 times more welfare fraudsters end up in the courts when government departments discriminate against people on lower incomes.
Work and Income have a policy of 100% repayment of any debt owed, whereas IRD will do any sorts of deal to get any sorts of money back from anybody that's engaged in tax evasion or tax fraud.
Alistair Russell says people on benefits are an easy target and more vulnerable.
A beneficiary will be portrayed as some sort of willful bludger, whereas someone who's been evading tax will be some innocent entrepreneur trying to make good in the world.
Criminal barrister Jeremy Bioletti has defended many high-profile white-collar offenders. He says he sees the inequality regularly.
Every day when I go into court and I look around, I feel guilty that I'm not able to assist the vast numbers of people who are there, who shouldn't be there.
Jeremy Bioletti says the bias in the justice system means even when a white-collar and blue-collar offender are being prosecuted for the same amount of money, their sentences will differ. He says the problem stems from the investigation phase.
If you move back earlier to see who is investigated and who is prosecuted, you'll see the same bias operating. In welfare fraud, there's a bias against women, there's a bias against Maori people generally, which is reflected in the number of people who are investigated and prosecuted, and there's a class bias.
Lisa Marriott says people who commit welfare fraud are judged more harshly because society has little sympathy for people on welfare, while white-collar criminals really do seem to get privileged treatment in the justice system. For Checkpoint, Sharon Brett Kelly.
11 minutes to 6 on Checkpoint. Would you honestly tell your local council how much your home is worth? The Christchurch City Council is in the process of getting valuations done on 160,000 properties so it can set next year's rates, business as usual. But it's asking people to tell it if earthquake repairs haven't been done yet so it can accurately assess their properties' values. Now, this is a difficult situation for Christchurch to find it in, but the council's move to rely on people's honesty is being called naive. Is it? Here's our Christchurch local government reporter, Conan Young.
When the valuations were last done 3 years ago, the government passed a special law allowing properties to be assessed as if any repairs had already been done. This year, the council is moving back to a business-as-usual approach and assessing the actual state of a property. Real estate agent Lynette McFadden says it's a worry the council is relying on people's honesty.
I think it's naive of our council to think that everybody is going to be meticulously honest. And I think that's what's required when you're dealing with somebody's biggest asset. And I think they've got to rely on more than somebody else's honesty.
Lawyer Duncan Webb says it's unfair to be asking homeowners how extensively damaged their home is when most aren't qualified to comment. He says some may even overstate the level of damage in order to get a lower valuation and a lower rates bill.
It's a very unusual valuation approach to rely on people to essentially dob themselves in if they haven't fixed up their house is extremely unreliable because people may or may not want that information out there.
Lawyer Peter Woods says there are a large number of houses sold in an as-is, whereas condition by owners who have pocketed the insurance money and not carried out any repairs. He says those looking to buy would be wise to get their own valuations done rather than rely on the rateable value.
It's a really interesting question whether you'd rely on the RV. As a matter of fact, people do. People always look at buying houses at RV or what percentage above or below. But I would have thought it's safer to actually get a valuation than rely on RV, particularly if the new values are based on people saying, yes, the work's been done right.
The council has contracted quotable value to carry out the valuations. It says it won't just be relying on a person's own assessment of their home and will look at other houses in the area that have sold and any consents owners have applied for to carry out repairs. It will also do physical inspections by parking outside a house and noting its general condition. Duncan Webb says the people of Christchurch deserve better.
What you really need here is a genuine valuation process. The fact of the matter is that the housing stock in Christchurch has changed drastically. Some have been repaired, some have been rebuilt, and some haven't been repaired at all. So what's really needed is an actual investigation into the value of the houses rather than a sort of once over lightly, let's see what the market's done and ask people if they fix their houses.
The council's chief executive, Carleen Edwards, says she's confident the system they've opted for will be reliable.
We need to understand what people have done to their own properties, so we need to rely on them providing that information. We're in a unique situation in the sense that we haven't had to revalue in the same sense following an earthquake. So this is a pragmatic approach to that.
The valuations carried out this year will feed into the rates that are set next year. In Christchurch for Checkpoint, Conan Young.
You're with Checkpoint on National Radio, 7.5 minutes to 6. Lots of feedback coming in on the Simon Bridges interview. We are going to discuss with Todd Niall, our Auckland reporter, the substantive issues. What is going to happen? Because with Simon Bridges, we didn't get much beyond the issue of whether or not this is a toll. Simon Bridges' word games are disgraceful. Someone says pricing and so-called demand-side interventions on roads are tolls. A toll is a toll and hurts the poor, not the rich. Roads and infrastructure should be paid for by a tax on land. That encapsulates a lot of what people are saying. Bridges calls it variable charging instead of tolls. Does he think we are morons in not realising they're the same, says Frank. When is a toll not a toll? When it's variable network pricing, which is how Simon Bridges described it. Has the Minister of Transport come straight from Yes Minister, asks Liz of Dunedin, and lots of people making comments along those lines. Some of them very funny but not entirely appropriate for radio. Team New Zealand has launched the boat which carries many of the secrets it hopes will win at the America's Cup next year. The 45-foot catamaran is slightly shorter than the eventual 50-foot race boat, which includes features the team has been working on for up to 2 years. Team New Zealand will use the boat to finalise ideas for the race boat that it will take to the Cup, which, remember, is in Bermuda, of all places. Our reporter Todd Niall asked skipper and sailing director Glenn Ashby what the boat represents.
Yeah, look, this is a wonderful opportunity for the team to finally showcase what effectively has been worked on behind closed doors for a very, very long time. So for us, this is a test platform, a test boat, but a lot of the components on this yacht are actually race replica parts, and some parts are actually possibly going to be used in the actual America's Cup next year themselves. So whilst we've got a huge amount of development work to do, over the next sort of 6 months before the race boat is actually launched, this gives us a great opportunity to get on the water here in Auckland and go out and test some settings, hydraulics, electronics, and really get familiar with this type of boat.
So this has got your secrets in it, has it?
What's under the bonnet is effectively what the secrets are. I mean, what you see on the external side of things is, a lot of the parts are one design componentry, but the electronics, the hydraulics, a lot of the systems inside the actual yacht itself and the wing are very much sort of trade secrets, if you like, at the moment, and hopefully that'll give us an edge over our opponents next year.
So how close to the eventual race boat is the collected bits on this one?
Yeah, look, very, very similar in actual fact. Whilst a lot of the parts on the race will have different hulls for the race yacht, they'll be fractionally longer than what we see here on the AC45 hulls. The race yacht will be an AC50, so fractionally longer, but the beams, the centre pod, the wing are all race componentry effectively, so a huge amount of hydraulics, electronics that need to be obviously tested and tuned. So a lot of those components will be basically shifted from this test platform into our race yacht down the track.
Some of the other teams have got to this point way ahead of you. Are you worried about that?
Look, it's been a great challenge for us. We've been doing a lot of work behind closed doors, so hopefully the stuff that we have been doing there, can bridge the gap fairly quickly. So we're very, very much looking forward to getting on the water, and I think we've got every opportunity by the end of the year to be really setting the bar very, very high.
If I knew what to look for, what would I be looking for at the boat here?
Yeah, look, it is basically a package that the dagger boards and the foils are something you can sort of see from externally. There'll be different boats have different appendages, but the actual electronics and the systems that drive those are the key to these types of boats getting around the track. So when you see manoeuvres and things not going quite so well out on the harbour, it'll be largely due to testing settings and testing systems. So, but guaranteed by the time we get over to the actual America's Cup itself, everything will be pretty dialed in.
From a sailing point of view, how much of a percentage leap is this from what you've been sailing so far?
Yeah, look, these 45s effectively are, a massive step forward in performance and technology compared to what we sail on the circuit boats. So these are very much, different. The 45 circuit boats are very mechanical, a lot of ropes, a lot of pulleys, a lot of hard huffing and puffing to get them around the track, whereas these boats, whilst very, very physical, have a huge amount more technology in them. So a great challenge.
You and the sailors must be keen to see what it does.
Yeah, look, absolutely. I mean, as a sailing team director, for me, it's absolutely frothing to get this boat on the water. It's been a long time coming, but at the end of the day, we've got a massive hill to climb. not only learning how to sail this boat, but help the development process with the designers and the engineers. So it's really, really looking forward to it. And as a team, and especially as a sailing team, we're very, very much looking forward to getting on the water here.
And when do you do that?
Hopefully in the next few days we'll be on the water, and it's going to be one of those ones. The first few days are very much sort of structural check-ins and systems check-ins, and we'll be working the boat up over the first few weeks of sailing.
Glenn Ashby there talking to Todd Niall. Really sorry about the audio interference there. We think it was Oracle trying to listen in. It's 2 minutes to 6. US authorities have released a partial transcript of calls made to emergency dispatchers by the Orlando nightclub gunman during his rampage, saying the chilling phone calls reveal his calm and deliberate manner. Here's Mana Rabi from Reuters.
Chilling and calm. That's how the FBI describes Omar Mateen when he paused to make 3 separate calls to emergency dispatchers during his 3-hour shooting spree at the Pulse nightclub, before continuing the rampage that left 49 people dead and more than 50 others injured.
But I don't know where my son is.
Authorities have just released a partial redacted transcript of those calls, saying Mateen called himself an Islamic soldier and demanded the U.S. stop bombing Syria and Iraq. The FBI's Ron Hopper says he also claimed he had rigged a car with bombs outside the club and threatened to strap explosive vests to his hostages.
While we're not releasing the audio, what I can tell you is that while the killer made these murderous statements, he did so in a chilling, calm, and deliberate manner.
No such vests or bombs were found, and while the transcripts don't include Mateen's pledge of loyalty to Islamic State, police say they do reveal the early evidence points to a man who was mentally disturbed and acted alone without direction from outside networks. Still, U.S. House Speaker Paul Ryan is calling on the Obama administration to have the full transcripts released, saying the American public deserves to be clear-eyed about who exactly carried out the worst mass shooting in U.S. history and why.
That report from Mana Rabi, Reuters. Lots of lovely feedback coming in about Peter Snell. Basically, people are just saying really nice things about him, comparing him to Ed Hillary, saying what a wonderful man he is, that his singlet joins another iconic singlet at Te Papa, that of Fred Dagg, a.k.a. John Clark. I didn't know that. What a lovely pairing, says Kerry Jimson. Here, Kerry. Thank you for all your nice comments about Peter. He was... I think a bit taken aback, overwhelmed, delighted and confused that his singlet's worth 122 grand. Kia ora everyone, you are with Checkpoint on RNZ National. However you're doing so, whether it's on the radio, the internet or Freeview Channel 50, thank you for being with us. Tonight, the government opens the door to road tolls in Auckland. What are the details around what they're planning? We're going to discuss that with Todd Niall. A Samoa newspaper apologises for that photo. And is it the new taste sensation? Ladies and gentlemen, brace yourselves for chocolate-coated meat. But first, before all of that, I'm with you entirely there, Katrina Batten, RNZ News.
Ngā mihi nui, good evening. The Transport Minister says Auckland motorists will be charged to pay for the city's transport system in the future, but he won't say when the tolls might be introduced. The government has previously been cool on the idea, but now backs it in a report jointly written with the Auckland Council. The government and council are trying to agree on new infrastructure that's needed over the next 30 years and new ways to fund it. Auckland Mayor Len Brown says road pricing needs to be agreed upon before an interim transport levy expires in 2 years' time. Simon Bridges told Checkpoint it could take up to a decade to introduce all the changes on the table. The National Secretary of the NZEI, Paul Galter, says a government proposal for changing the school funding system is a new version of the divisive bulk funding system of the 1990s. The proposal suggests that schools be allowed to decide how much of their annual funding to allocate to staffing. Mr Galter says it looks like bulk funding and is a bad idea.
I noticed in the Cabinet paper the Minister was at pains to say this isn't like the historical bulk funding of the 90s, but when you look at the detail which is in the supporting documentation, you'd have to think that this is bulk funding, and it was rejected in the 90s. I have no idea why they want to come back to it again.
Paul Galter says bulk funding would encourage schools to scrimp on staffing in order to spend money elsewhere, and it would undermine staffing ratios. The Education Minister, Hekia Parata, says bulk funding is not on the agenda. The Christchurch City Council is defending its decision to rely on people's honesty when deciding how much their homes are worth. The council is getting valuations done on 160,000 properties so it can set next year's rates, and is asking people to say whether earthquake repairs have been done so it can accurately assess their property's value. Some say it's naive, but the council says it will also look at sales data for neighbouring properties, conduct physical inspections from the street and view building consents. The council's chief executive, Carleen Edwards, says she's confident the system will be reliable.
We need to understand what people have done to their own properties, so we need to rely on them providing that information. We're in a unique situation in the sense that we haven't had to revalue in the same sense following an earthquake. So this is a pragmatic approach to that.
The Christchurch City Council Chief Executive, Carleen Edwards. The Labour and Green parties have held their first joint meeting with business groups today. Around 50 people attended the briefing organised by the Trans-Tasman Business Circle in Wellington. The Labour leader, Andrew Little, says it was a chance for business leaders to ask questions about how the two parties will work together now that they've signed a memorandum of understanding.
The lines of questions were genuine about just probing different policy issues, and I think an acceptance too about what the major challenges are facing New Zealand, and a genuine willingness to hear from us about the way we would approach them, and seeing, as I say, where there's common ground and where there are some differences.
The Labour leader, Andrew Little. The Department of Corrections is playing down reports of a riot at Mount Eden Prison this afternoon. It says 14 inmates decided to hold a protest over being transferred out of the prison and barricaded themselves on a landing. Jeanette Burns says it was peacefully resolved after an hour. The prison was put into lockdown. The police in Vanuatu have laid charges against the driver of a tourist bus involved in a crash in which 3 locals died. Several Australians travelling on the bus had been medevaced overseas from the capital Port Vila. Sally Round reports.
A Vanuatu man has been charged with reckless driving causing death after he allegedly crossed the centre line and collided with an oncoming vehicle. That vehicle's driver was killed, as was one of his passengers, a woman who was 8 months pregnant. 3 of the tourists, including a child, were seriously injured and have been airlifted to New Caledonia. More air ambulances are arriving to take the remaining injured tourists to a hospital in Brisbane. The tourists were returning from a cultural show to their cruise ship Pacific Dawn. This is Sally Round.
The International Olympic Committee is expected to confirm tonight that Russian track and field athletes will be banned from this year's Rio Games following allegations of state-sponsored doping. Last week, the governing body of World Athletics decided not to lift a suspension imposed in November. President Vladimir Putin describes the ruling as unfair and unjust. The BBC's David Ornstein reports.
Confirmation that Russia's track and field team are to be excluded from the biggest sporting show on earth will, the IOC hopes, send the strongest possible message in the fight against drug cheats. And when leading figures from the Olympic movement meet here in Lausanne, they'll consider how to deal not only with Russia, but other countries who've breached the World Anti-Doping Code too, such as Kenya.
David Ornstein in Lausanne. To sport, and the Wallabies coach Michael Cheika says Steve Hanson's comments about him are shallow and potshot. Hanson says Cheika allowed England coach Eddie Jones to bully him in the media during their test series in Australia. Jones has been the more vocal of the two coaches during his side's series win over Australia, but Cheika says that wasn't deliberate on his part. Team New Zealand has launched its first custom-designed development boat ahead of next year's America's Cup in Bermuda. The 45-foot boat is the final stage before the team builds the 50-foot race boat. It will campaign next year. America's Cup holders Oracle launched their development boat in October last year, giving them an 8-month head start of Team New Zealand. But design coordinator Dan Bernasconi says it's not a concern.
We're not looking at the other guys and scratching our heads, wondering why they're doing those things or thinking that's something we've never thought of. So, we're late on the water, but we're quietly confident that we've got a great boat here and it's a great platform for moving forwards towards the Cup.
And a 0-0 draw against Slovakia has frustrated England coach Roy Hodgson as his side reached the knockout stages of the European football champs in France. England's failure to beat Slovakia means Wales have qualified top of their group. It means England will now play the runners-up in Group F instead of a potentially easier tie against one of the third-place teams. That's the news.
Any normal man had reached down, picked him up and cut his damned head off. Again. But not Ole. He picked him up, stopped him from bleeding, and that was his headless chicken. And that was Mike.
Nights with Brian Crump. Online and on air, Monday to Friday, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Thank you, Brian. Met service weather to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Taranaki, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty, Taumaranui and Taupō. Mostly cloudy, patchy drizzle turning to widespread rain overnight, with some heavy falls tomorrow easing from Waikato southwards later. Gisborne to Wairarapa, also Taihape, Whanganui and Manawatu. High clouds, scattered rain developing tomorrow morning, clearing south of Napier tomorrow evening. Horowhenua to Wellington, cloudy, rain developing to overnight. Buller, Nelson and northern Marlborough, occasional rain becoming persistent and heavier tonight, easing for a time tomorrow morning and afternoon. For the remainder of Marlborough and Canterbury, high cloud with scattered rain overnight. Westland and Fiordland, rain, heavy at times and possibly thundery from tonight. Otago and Southland, cloudy with scattered rain this afternoon and evening. And the Chatham Islands, cloudy, a few showers until evening, rain developing tomorrow. It's coming up to 6:09.
Katrina, lots of lovely comments about you here. People who are listening on the radio won't have seen Katrina's new hairdo. It's one of the good things about watching on the telly, Freeview Channel 50 or live streaming. Yep. Philip Patston, who's a good man, says, great hair, Katrina Batten, exclamation mark, hair.
Thank you, Philip. Nice to know. People are watching.
Yeah, it's nice. Magnificent hairdo. Katrina Batten. Thanks, Katrina. Coming up in the next half hour, we are going to look at a public health crisis in the South Pacific next, but let's go back to these road tolls. They look more likely to become a reality in Auckland. In fact, it looks totally likely to become a reality. The government has previously been cool on the idea of road user charges. In fact, they've written them off entirely. But now in a report jointly written by the Auckland Council, it's changed its tune. Transport Minister Simon Bridges confirmed to Checkpoint about an hour ago that road pricing will be part of the government's toolkit in the future.
There will come a point in our network in the not too distant future, and we're not there right yet, where we just can't keep adding lanes to the motorways. And I think, again, you'd say, well, most people would agree with that. So then you have to move from the supply when you've done the Northwestern Busway, when you've looked further south at the local roads and the public transport, and you've accelerated the projects that will make sense regardless of what you do on the demand side. Then you have to say, actually, we need some behavioural shift, yes, onto public transport. Yes, actually, I think increasingly, and people would say this was sci-fi a little while ago, but connected cars, ride sharing, which is changing behaviour.
That's Transport Minister Simon Bridges. Auckland Issues correspondent Todd Nile joins me now in the studio. Todd, it was kind of inexact, that interview. So there was no time frame, there was no clarity. I mean, the minister simply didn't want to use the word tolls. On the face of it, it looks absolutely like tolls. The government's previously rejected tolls. All of this is a bit confusing. You've got the document yourself. What does the document tell us is going to happen?
Well, I mean, the interview reflects the document. The document is almost impenetrable in its vagueness and its jargon and its use of phrases that really could mean anything. So remember, this is the in-between report between the opening one and the final one, which will come later in the year, and the final one will have the detail. So clearly they're talking as vaguely as possible about where this might be going, but clearly the one thing that came out from the minister's interview and is from the report is that pricing, tolls, whatever you want to call it, it's the same thing, will play a part. But I guess where the semantics comes in is that tolls, people think of $2 to use that bit of road. Variable, whatever it is, pricing could change by time of day, let you onto a big part of the motorway or just one small part. But definitely that is coming.
Okay. The government's problem, before we move on to look forward, when we look back, the government's problem is that they were so explicit, unequivocal, singular and high volume about the fact that this was never going to happen, right? Particularly around 2012, 2013, when Len Brown was desperately trying to pay for the City Rail Loop.
Yeah, well, good point mentioning the City Rail Loop, because this process, this several years, reflects exactly what happened with the City Rail Link. 2010, they were poles apart. Council says must happen, government says you must be crazy. And that rhetoric, the public rhetoric from the government remained cool and vaguely hostile right up to the point where the Prime Minister came out and said, yep, we're backing it. Because there was the public words of the government and behind the scenes things were moving along. And this looks the same.
Right, the same process is taking place.
Yeah.
So we're just getting a peek here, are we, to what's happening behind the scenes?
Yeah, so really if you try and extrapolate where this is going, Simon Bridges is saying exactly what Auckland and transport advocates have said for years. We can't just build, we have to change behaviour. Pricing is one of those ways that you get people out of the cars. And all of those things now are starting to come through in this report and in the words of the minister.
So does that mean the government's listened?
Well, I think they always listen, but they seem to need a lot more time. They've got a lot more officials, and they've got to take into account, well, if we do this for Auckland, what does it mean for the rest of the country? But there have been signs on this one from quite early on that certainly at the officials level there was a lot of interest in road pricing, because they could see, this is government officials, they could see that what Auckland needed simply wasn't going to be paid out of the money that was available.
Todd, in this extraordinary document, which I haven't had the opportunity to go through yet, I mean, all I know about it is a quick price here I've read and what I learned from the minister. Is there a time frame there at all for any of this stuff?
No, so longer term on variable pricing, but in the report they do say that within the next decade that the process will move to staged implementation of a pricing system. So maybe particular bits where there are problems could start early. So it's all about trying to deal with the most congested bits first. If they can find a system to trial on those, perhaps it does happen earlier than a decade.
Right. Todd Niall, our Auckland reporter. Thank you very much indeed, Todd. We appreciate your expertise and insight. There is a public health crisis in the South Pacific region, and it's getting worse. And the cost in both lives and money is having a profound impact on an increasing number of Pacific countries. In the western part of the region, non-communicable diseases like diabetes and heart disease, and I quote, account for more than 80% of all deaths and 50% of premature deaths. The first regional conference to try and do something about this is underway in Tonga's capital Nuku'alofa. With obesity levels particularly high in the region, this is a regional crisis. Among those at the conference, Helen Clark. Indira Stewart has more on this.
Pacific countries are among the top 10 obese countries in the world, with Palau having the highest prevalence at 80% of its adult population. Helen Clark, the head of the United Nations Development Programme, gave the keynote address and called those statistics distressing. But she believes Pacific governments can beat the NCD crisis.
My purpose in coming down to the NCD summit in Tonga was to say this can be done, but it needs very determined action, and communities have to be empowered and involved.
The 3-day summit will feature an entire day focusing on diabetes alone. Paula Viveli, the Public Health Director of the Pacific regional body, the Pacific Community, is dismissing figures in the report which showed Tonga as having the highest prevalence of adult diabetes. But he does agree it's a significant issue in the region.
When you discuss NCDs, for many of the people, diabetes is what they see, with the amputees, with the kidney failure, with the people going blind. And so the whole idea of putting diabetes at the center of the summit is really to look at opportunities to address diabetes a little bit better. Well, Tonga would not agree with the figures quoted in the report. It is still a significant problem for all Pacific Islands.
A regional NCD roadmap was established in 2014 to help Pacific governments tackle the problem. But the Pacific Community's Director General, Colin Tukuitonga, says progress has been poor and there's been little change across the region.
Some countries that have done a good job, but it's not done across the region, and that's the problem. And one of the weaknesses in this, of course, is that the tobacco industry would still target the countries that don't have effective interaction. So whilst it's good that we have a roadmap, it's not being applied consistently and uniformly across the region.
He says policy changes need to go further than just the health department.
I don't think it's an issue of health policies. If anything, it's an issue on food policies, on trade, opportunities for exercise and more physical activity, promotion of sport, all of those things that are actually outside of the health sector. And that's the issue, because most people see this as a health issue when it is not.
Helen Clark says the government's role is critical, but effective implementation means going further than just passing laws.
This is very complex, and you have to involve communities. You have to involve the religious leaders. You have to have the local groups which relate to the needs of local people. So it's more than government. Governments need to do the right things, but communities have to be engaged and empowered. If we can get this big partnership, I'm confident the Pacific can beat these diseases back.
The conference follows the release of the Global Nutrition Report, which also put Pacific countries at the top of malnutrition statistics and showed most of the region will fail to reach global nutrition targets. It attributed the malnutrition to poor quality diets, not a lack of food. For Checkpoint, Indira Stewart.
Indira is based with our Radio New Zealand international team who do such a great job of covering our region. It's 6:17 with just a few weeks to go until the Rio Olympics. Brazil's sports minister is encouraging the government to purchase Olympic tickets for school children because more than 2 million tickets remain unsold. Here's Gavina Garay from Reuters.
The 2016 Brazil Summer Olympics are 4 weeks away, but ticket sales are lagging. Only half the tickets have been sold. Now officials are looking for new ways to boost ticket sales, opening kiosks with the hope that locals will respond with their wallets. The country's new sports minister is reportedly even encouraging the government to purchase tickets for school children to attend. But boosting ticket sales and consumer confidence comes amid a climate of uncertainty given the country's recent political turmoil and an economic downturn. International concern over the mosquito-borne Zika virus hasn't helped either. Some athletes have said they think the games should be postponed while health authorities deal with the outbreak. But 2016 Director of Tickets Donovan Ferretti is maintaining a brave face. He says that despite the problems, he's optimistic.
We have a total of 6 million tickets, and 4.2 million tickets have been sold. We hope that on opening these kiosks, this number will grow more quickly, taking into account the Brazilian culture of buying tickets last minute.
Brazilian officials say the games must go on and that they will work to protect the public's health, safety, and security.
The time on Checkpoint is 19 minutes past 6. Coming up on World Watch in about 8.5 minutes with Elizabeth Brown tonight, the Trump family's part in a shock campaign sacking, and could a Brexit fuel tensions in Northern Ireland? What is the Irish take on this? All of that and more coming up with Elizabeth in about 8 minutes. A Samoa newspaper at the centre of a storm over its publication of an explicit photograph of an apparent suicide has now printed a front page apology. The Samoan Observer's use of the image of a transgender woman whose body had only just been discovered and was still as it was found has stirred outrage. The country's Prime Minister called it insensitive and unethical, and many people have used much stronger language than that. Police have made no official reports on the woman's death, and while her name is known, it's not yet been officially released. Lucy Smith has more.
The woman was found in a church hall, and the picture published showed her at the scene. The chief editor of the paper, Xavier Sano Malifa, apologised this morning. In a statement, he said that the truth was they had made a sad mistake and they have apologised to the woman's family in person. The newspaper has published the letters of criticism they've received over the use of the photograph in today's edition. Xavier Sano Malifa had also apologised earlier, but said people overseas seem to have taken offence over the photo's use.
People die all the time. Journalists should go for the truth. And the truth is what we published. The funny thing is that there was very little response to the story from here in Samoa. Most of it came from overseas. That was where the criticisms came from, but here in Samoa it was very little.
The Pacific Island Media Association's Felicia Brown-Acton says the publication has shown no moral compass by choosing to display such an image.
Samoa Observer obviously haven't been very helpful with the way that they're portrayed in an image of a young whawhawhine, transgender woman in Samoa. The reaction that it's caused has been quite a negative one in regards to how her death wasn't respected.
In a written statement, Samoa's Prime Minister Tui Laepa Sailele Male Lengaoi added his support to the public outcry.
Like many others, I was appalled at the front page of the Samoa Observer showing a lifeless body of a young person with such callousness and disrespect. What the editor of the Observer has shown to Samoa and the world is that he is above any moral or professional obligation to report ethically and responsibly.
Pacific Freedom Forum's New Zealand correspondent Jason Brown says it's a case of the media not thinking it through.
The reporter is ordered to get all the facts, and that's what reporters are paid to do. It's then up to the editor to exercise editorial discretion and show some common decency, show some ethics, and not upset family, friends, and the general public and further in what's already a deeply upsetting incident.
Jason Brown says suicide needs to be discussed rather than avoided, but this is a case of a media outlet clearly crossing the line. The Samoan Observer says it offers its humble apologies to the LGBT community locally and overseas, and says usually the newspaper is a strong supporter of the Whaawhine community. This is Lucy Smith.
6:23. The pronunciation of Māori place names announced on Wellington trains has not always been that good, but the Regional Council is determined to change all that. Here's Laura Bootham from Te Manu Korehi.
Station Nio.
It's the end of the line for the pronunciation of those Māori place names, as well as others on Wellington's train network. And Therese McLeod of Taranaki Whanui, the mana whenua of the Port Nicholson area, is celebrating.
I'm so excited by that. You know, it's fantastic that people are making the effort to move towards correcting these mispronunciations and normalising it in these contexts. I think it's very, very important that we do that to hear it properly.
For the last few years, Auckland Transport has used a Māori actor to make sure the names are said correctly. Now, the Greater Wellington Regional Council is getting up to speed. Its Te Pou Whakarai, Māori Relationships, Rawiri Faulkner, says the council is on track to roll out the new recordings on trains during the next 2 weeks.
We acknowledge that if it is wrong on a particular station, it should be fixed. I have been aware of the words where they have been mispronounced, and that's why we've gone through the process of rectifying it like we have.
He says while not all Māori place names are mispronounced, there is a need for change.
We should be pronouncing Māori kupu correctly. I mean, there's no doubt about that, and we all have a responsibility as Māori and as New Zealanders to do that, and so I'm very supportive of making sure that we get this right.
The Victoria University of Wellington teaching fellow, Vinnie Olsen-Reeder, studies te reo Māori and bilingualism. He's noticed some of the pronunciation is not always very precise.
Classic ones, I think, have to be ones like Paraparaumu, which is Paraparaumu, Ngaio, Ngaio, Ararua, which is Ararua.
Mr Olsen-Reeder says the new train announcements are a great idea and will help the Greater Wellington Regional Council move towards better relationships with local Māori. He says normalising the use of te reo Māori will help everyone learn its correct pronunciation.
Just promoting the normal use of correct pronunciation of te reo. There's a little bit of research around that kind of suggests that it's really what happens in everyday life that gestures people towards pronouncing things a certain way and having certain attitudes towards sort of minority languages. And so I think that's a really cool gesture towards that.
The Greater Wellington Regional Council's Rawiri Faulkner says the new recordings are not the only change afoot.
It's not the end either, so we're going through a continuous process of making sure we evolve and improve. We've got some bilingual terms on bus signs, things like that. So we're always looking for ways to improve what we do to support the native tongue.
The Māori Language Commission says it's very pleased to hear the council is addressing issues around pronunciation, and while it hasn't heard the new audio yet, it looks forward to doing so. For Checkpoint, ko Laura Bootham Tene.
Kia ora, Laura. New Zealand is renowned for its beef and lamb. Beef and lamb. But what happens when it's coated in chocolate? I hear no one ask. However, an ag research food scientist has come up with just that. Waikato farmed beef coated in chocolate produced by boutique chocolate maker Devonport Chocolates. What's it like? Well, Andrew McRae was among the first to sample it.
I'm with Dr. Mustafa Farouk, a senior scientist with Ag Research here in Hamilton.
Yeah.
Mustafa, a combination of chocolate and meat, not something we'd initially think would go together, but what's the background to it?
Well, Andrew, New Zealand is a big exporter of meat, and we are always looking at ways that we can add value to meat. Rather than exporting boxes of beef, meat or slabs of meat, we would like to be exporting a higher value product in the future. So that is actually the initial thought. But then again, if you look at our own population, our population is getting older, and we have people who love to eat meat, but they cannot eat meat or they cannot swallow properly. So the initial thought was, how can we put meat and its goodness into this kind of products for such people? That's how it started. But then when you look at a product like this, bringing chocolate that people really love, and then meat again, with the goodness of meat, the higher protein, the higher vitamin B12, and other nutrients like iron and zinc, So when you put the two together and you put it in a form that is familiar and form that is already accepted, then you will get a lot of these people to consume such products. And now that we know that it has higher nutrient content, then it is going to be a good product for people who are very active. It will be a good product for toddlers and our youngsters. So if you look at it, the whole demographic, population would be able to enjoy a product like this. Yeah. So now we started off by thinking of our aging population, but now we think that product can actually go for almost everyone, actually. Yeah.
And a good excuse to eat more chocolate.
Yeah, good excuse. I mean, how can you beat that? You have chocolate, you have meat. For people who love meat, love chocolate, it's like killing two birds with one stone.
So we've got the chocolates here. They look like normal chocolates. So what is the meat combination in those chocolates?
Well, right here, there's 50% beef in these chocolates. So the inside is meat, and then the outside is enrobed in dark chocolate. Yeah.
You're testing it, taste testing it here at Field Days. So what reaction are you getting from the public?
Well, the reaction, of course, is mixed, but majority of the people that have filled the forms, and we have now close to 700 forms that have been filled, I would say close to 85% to 90% of the people love it. There are about 10%, of course, among those people who don't like the idea, or they just can't get over, the idea of eating meat and chocolate together. Yeah, but 90% of the people that return the forms, they love the idea, yes.
Well, I've tasted one of the chocolates, and if you hadn't told me it had meat in it, I wouldn't have known. No, yeah. Is that the general reaction?
Yeah, that's the general reaction, yes. A lot of people, when you tell them, this has 50% meat, they are expecting to chew a bit, a bit of steak inside this chocolate. And once, they put their teeth in, they realize that they are eating something that they can't tell that there's any meat in it at all.
That is work being done by Ag Research. Waikato Farm beef coated in chocolate, produced by boutique chocolate maker Devonport Chocolates. Goodness gracious me, the modern world. That ends Checkpoint for tonight, but we will be back tomorrow night at 5 o'clock. We hope you can join us then. Thank you for being with us on behalf of our excellent team. It's wonderful to have you along for the ride. See you tomorrow at 5.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The Transport Minister says Auckland motorists will be charged to pay for the city's transport system in the future, but he won't say when the tolls might be introduced. The Principals Federation says the government's proposal for a radical overhaul of the way teacher salaries are funded sounds like bulk funding. Corrections is playing down reports of a riot at Mount Eden Prison, saying 14 inmates barricaded themselves on a landing in protest against being transferred. The IOC is expected to confirm tonight that Russian track and field athletes will be banned from this year's Rio Games following allegations of state-sponsored doping. And the Christchurch City Council is defending its decision to rely on people's honesty when deciding how much their homes are worth. Our next news and weather is at 7.